What is reframing in NLP, and how can you use it to solve problems? Stay tuned. Damon here with NLP Gym. Reframing. Expanding frame size and shrinking frame size. Before I get into this, if you haven't already, please click subscribe to this YouTube channel so you can get these videos on a regular basis. Reframing used to be pretty much what NLP was about, and it was done primarily through language. And then as the technology expanded and grew, they found that there's more to reframing than just language. There's a lot more that you can do with it. We're not going to go too much into that. I'm going to stick to just what really reframing is and how can you use it to solve problems. The idea of a frame is really what your attention is on. If you think of a frame, like on a painting or in a picture, it sort of outlines where you're going to put your focus of attention. And the same is true when it comes to information. When I say information, that's not just like information you read in a book or a textbook or something like that. When I say information, I'm talking about everything that comes in through your five senses. We use, in NLP, we use the metaphor of a frame to say what is in our attention or what is in consciousness versus what is outside of consciousness. So everything inside the frame is everything that we're focused on. It's everything that's in our awareness. You could even say that's what's in our consciousness. Everything outside the frame is either fuzzy and vague, or we're completely not conscious of it because we're focused on just this. If you've ever heard the term, and I'm sure you have, think outside the box. Well, what a person is actually telling you to do is to reframe, to think outside of the frame or outside of the box in which you feel stuck in. So when it comes to problems, and reframing isn't only about problems, but when it comes to problems, we get stuck because our attention is only focused in one sort of area. And inside that area, we can't see out of it. So when you reframe, it means you're changing the frame, changing the way that you're looking at the problem, or opening the frame to get more information in, or closing the frame to focus more on the specific details. Now there are other types of reframing. There's basically changing the frame of, changing it to something completely different. And if you think about it, like if I'm up this close and you can only see my mouth, well, this can be useful if you're a dentist or a language expert, or if you're lip reading. But if that's not what you're interested in, this doesn't give you very much information. So I pull back, and now you have more information. You can see my face. Now, if you think about how you focus on a problem like that, you can think about focusing on a problem and expanding the frame to a greater context in which the problem is in. To shrink the frame down is to focus in on the specifics of what may be causing the problem. Now, there's no right or wrong way to this. They're both useful and given the context. So let's use an example. Financial issues. This is something I struggled with for a long time, and NLP really helped me out with this. So one of the beliefs that I had, and this is what reframing is so good for. In fact, Robert Dilts created the 14 reframing patterns called sleight of mouth, and that's just one set of reframes. There's pretty much endless sets of reframes. There are all going to be some variation, though, of expanding the frame size, shrinking the frame size, or shifting the frame size, or shifting the frame to something entirely different. And you can get very creative with this, and that's what Robert Dilts did. For this, though, we will just focus on the size, expanding and shrinking, and the beliefs. So I had a limiting belief that I just couldn't get ahead in my finances. Every time I made more money, I seemed to spend it just as quickly, and it didn't feel like I was gaining anything, or it didn't feel like I was running out and going shopping or going out and eating out a lot more. None of these things seemed to be the case, but there was always some sort of expense that came out of nowhere, and I felt like I was exactly where I was. And this is the key to frames. If you're not aware of them, they tend to make your life continue on the way that it is, even though outside elements may come into play. An example of this is they did a study with insurance agents, and they had a quota and they would hit that quota. Well, they would move the insurance agents to a place where there was more opportunity, more leads, more people, like a city. And since there was more opportunity, they should be able to do more sales. They didn't change the quota though. What did the insurance agent do? Despite more opportunity, the insurance agents still hit the same quota because that's what they were set on. So that's what their frame sort of dictated. They didn't have to work as hard, but their frame was set on that quota. So they kept hitting the same target. Take those insurance agents, bringing them to a rural area where there should be fewer opportunities. The quota stayed the same. Guess what they did? They hit the same quota. They had to work a little bit harder, but that frame was set, so they just kept going to that target. So for me, I was having trouble in my finances. I was making more money every year, but still seemed to have the same amount of trouble. So if I expanded the frame size on that to what my financial situation was and saw a greater context, what I noticed was these expenses that seemed to come out of nowhere, well, now I had that information. I understood where these expenses were coming from. And they could have been debts that I hadn't paid. They could have been overdue bills that I had put out of my mind. As soon as I started making more money, then I started paying off those bills. So in expanding the frame size, I started to understand that these expenses weren't just coming out of nowhere, that I had some direct connection to where these expenses were coming from. I had just deleted them. Anything outside of my frame was information that I had deleted, but by expanding the frame size, I could understand where it was coming from. Therefore, with this new information, I had more control over these expenses, and they didn't seem to come out of nowhere and blindside me. Now, if I shrink down that frame size on my financial situation, well, then I could see some of these details, that some of these expenses that if I focused on them really closely, I realized I didn't really need them. Even though they seemed like they were so important whenever I took them on, by shrinking that frame size, I could get a closer look and I could say, you know what, I really don't need this. And I could let those expenses go. So see what you can do with applying this idea of a frame size. If you can elicit a limiting belief, and how you do that is just think about something you want. So I wanted to get ahead in my finances. Well, what stopped me? Well, it felt like I couldn't get ahead in my finances because every time I made more money, more expenses came around. And that's the causation. You can go even further than that and say, well, what does that mean? And that's what we call the complex equivalence. Well, what that meant to me was there was no point in trying to make more money or trying to increase my money or increase what I was saving, because it would just go away anyway. So it felt kind of helpless. So when you elicit a limiting belief like that, think about, okay, well, what am I deleting? What is outside of that context that I'm not seeing? Expand that context. So what is a greater context? That's a good question to ask when it comes to expanding the frame size. What is the greater context in which your problem is in? A lot of times this can help you and solve this problem right away, because then it puts it into a greater context, and maybe the problem doesn't seem as big now, and it's easy to overcome. Whereas if your frame is too small, the problem might seem too big. And then also you could shrink that frame size down and realize when you look at the finer details that you missed something from before. Now, not any one of these is going to be correct, and sometimes you can expand frame size, and even though you take in more information, you might not solve the problem. The same thing with shrinking it down. So those are just two reframes. There probably are infinite amounts of reframes. It's only limited to your creativity. One thing to remember about reframing too is all of your problems, all of this, how your frames are set, have to do with a positive intent. Keep that in mind. That's a presupposition in NLP. All behavior comes from a positive intent. A lot of people struggle with this when they think about horrible behavior. That's a different video. But just for now, think of all your frames are set due to or they come from a positive intent. All your problems, believe it or not, are actually created from deep down inside from a positive intent. when you get in touch with that positive intent and you find ways to reframe based on that positive intent, now you're onto something really, really powerful. So the positive intent, like say a person smokes, that's a problem. The positive intent there might be that having a cigarette is the only time the person gets to have some alone time to think and to be to themselves. So the positive intent is to take some time out for myself. I can change that behavior as long as I honor that positive intent and replace that behavior with something else that honors that positive intent. And this is where reframing can really come in. So what are different ways that I can honor that positive intent and change the behavior? So that itself, looking for positive intent, is actually a reframe. Understanding that all of this comes from a positive intent is a much deeper way of looking at this, and that is a reframe. Check out our website, nlp-gym.com. Follow us on Facebook for updates on free practice sessions that we hold and upcoming trainings. Also, like I said, subscribe to this YouTube channel and you'll get these videos on a regular basis. I hope to see you at one of our upcoming workshops or trainings, and I hope to see you at one of our free practice sessions. Take care.